Now you can hear the, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague at GSAP, who many of you in the audience know, Vajan Chakrabarty, who's going to facilitate and chair our next panel on thinking about financing and making happen waterfront development.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Can everyone hear me? So this is the rough and tough panel, right? The developers.
Tell me that.
Right, yeah, this is the rough and tough panel of the folks who actually go out and build on our waterfronts across the world.
And get bankrupt.
And get bankrupt, I hope not. I think one of the things that we really want to explore with this panel is what really makes development different along the waterfront. How is it different from developing along the inland or elsewhere? What kind of risks are really very distinct in dealing with waterfronts? What are, the financing mechanisms that are different, the regulatory mechanisms that are different? And I think in that, the very special issue of how is it that the relationship with the public is different. And I mean that in two different ways, which is how is the relationship with the public sector, government, different, and how is the relationship with the public at large different as a consequence of building on the water. And also, I think it'd be good to touch on issues of sort of design and land use, which I think is a particularly interesting question for waterfront developments. And lastly, affordability and access, and who is the waterfront for in these various visions that you're going to present. So really from right to left, Serdar Bilgili, who's the chairman of Bilgili Holdings, and he's going to go first. My good friend Surendra Hirnandani, who's the founder of the Hirnandani Group from Mumbai. From Istanbul, of course, is Serdar. My friend from many, many years back, Paul Januszewski, who is the Vice President for Planning and Government Relations at Rockrose, a major developer here, but also has worked in numerous governmental capacities having to do with the waterfront. And so he can really touch on both the public and private role. And then Gregory Vaca. Greg is from Tishman Speyer in Rio de Janeiro and is leading a major waterfront redevelopment there. So with no further ado, Serdar, if you could take it away.
Thank you so much, and one more time, I really appreciate being here, and thank you for inviting me. Let me see how this works. Okay, so I was very lucky to be a part of, I think, one of the biggest and most important projects, I should say, of Europe right now, of real estate projects. It involves waterfront development, it involves restoration of historic properties, and it actually involves changing the city life of a major metropolitan city in Europe. If you allow me, I want to stand up. So, as you have seen from Professor Gerçek's presentation, Istanbul actually is 14 million people officially, but unofficially probably we are around 18 million people. So that makes Istanbul probably the largest city in Europe right now. But luckily we are located in such a special geographical place that the city is surrounded by water, and in the middle of the city we have a sea that is, in the middle of the city there is a sea channel that's dividing the city into two between Europe and Asia. And this area, which is the entrance of the Golden Horn, the entrance of the Bosphorus, is where all the, I should say, whatever there's of architecture from Ottoman Empire is located in this area. So the Galata Tower, the Blue Mosque, the Süleymaniye Mosque, these are all located in this area. And we are very lucky to be able to get a waterfront land of 1.2 kilometers waterfront in the center of this location. So this property is about 150,000 square meter land. As I've said, it's thin and long. It has 1.2 kilometer of waterfront. At the moment, we have some existing historic buildings, and there are warehouses, which is also used as the cruise ship port of Istanbul. It's the only cruise ship port that exists right now in the city. And unfortunately, it is in a very bad shape. And let me see. I want to actually show you what it was before in the historic times. This is part of the development, and this is what it looked like. This is probably about 700-800 years ago. So, just to show you, the 1.2 kilometer waterfront is consisting of a very luxury hotel, which is going to be the top hotel in Istanbul. And this is restoring of the existing old buildings. We will have actually the Istanbul Modern, which is the most important modern museum of Turkey, I should say. It's the MoMA of Turkey, is located in our property, and it's we will probably rebuild it and extend it and enlarge it. There's another museum which is a part of the Istanbul University, and the project will cover a lot of retail, offices, restaurants, and the most important, an area that is covered to public right now will be open to public. So there will be a lot of public spaces, there will be parks, and Istanbul people, although they are living on the waterfront, unfortunately they are not using the waterfront as much. So basically the city will meet the water here. So this is a view of the property. So this is the start. This is, so these three buildings plus this is going to be the luxury hotel, and this will be some luxury retail, and then this is the Istanbul Modern Museum, and these are the ugly warehouses which are really not used at all right now, and this whole area, as I've said, is covered by walls, and right now you don't even see the water in this area. I want to show some more photographs. What you see behind is the Galata Tower of Istanbul, which is from 500s, very, very historic, beautiful tower. And these are the three old buildings which will be restored and turned into a hotel. This is a continuation. This is the Istanbul Modern Museum, which will be rebuilt, and the warehouses from a closer perspective. At the moment, this property is used as the cruise ship port of Istanbul. So in the summer times, we get about 5 to 6 huge cruise ship ports, and in the winter time, it's quite calm. And what we are doing now with the new development, the cruise ship port terminal will be taken under the ground, and this area, which is normally a duty-free zone right now, it will be open to public. So our goal here is to make the city of Istanbul, the people of Istanbul, enjoy the waterfront, and with the historic background. Some more photographs, and I will share with you what the new design will look like. This is not final. We are still working on it. We have actually hired 6 major architectural firms internationally, top 50, to do the project. They did their first initial designs, and finally we have selected a combination of Dror, who's a very important designer, and Genzer, which is one of the largest architectural firms. They combined together to develop this project. So the project will have a lot of public spaces. The design was the main issue here because it is located so important location, because you have the historic sites around you. So the design should be respecting the history, but it should be contemporary, but at the same time it should be understated. So I think this design is going on that direction without losing the background sites of the Topkapı Palace and the Blue Mosque. And it also has to be the feeling of the luxury, but as I've mentioned, quite understated, with the use of Turkish materials, stones, bricks, or concrete as on the facade. And this is a look of how the restoration is going to look like. So just want to give you a brief, some numbers. This project is going to be approximately 200,000 leasable area, and the total investment is $1.2 billion. I don't want to go into the financing. My time is over, so if there are questions, I will try to answer them afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All had a question. Are they high rises or low rises?
All of them low rises.
All low.
Yes. It's all going to be low rises because we want to respect the existing historical buildings, the existing surrounding, and as I've said, this area is the old Istanbul, the history of Istanbul, and the buildings should be respecting that.
What's the built-up area?
It is 200,000 square meter. Please.
Okay. Surrender.
So, very happy to be here, very excited. I'm from Mumbai. I'm born in Mumbai, studied in Mumbai. Whatever I am is because of Mumbai. There's nothing never. My kids have studied in the US, but not me. And my father was a refugee from what is now Pakistan, studied as a doctor, suffered from malnutrition and poverty as a child, and lived in Mumbai, died last September at the age of 96, that too because of Parkinson, with genes I hope I don't get. But it just goes to show that we have all these photos showing it's a polluted, congested city, but it's probably more healthy living there than elsewhere. So, this is, I just brought one of our developments. We have a couple of developments. Along the ocean waterfront is, I've done individual buildings. Though in the city of Chennai, I've got a 100-acre nice waterfront development going on. But in Mumbai, but I have got around the lake. So we have developed a large 200-acre project around the lake, which we started in 91. It took about 10 years, almost, escape from bankruptcy 3 times before we reached a cycle of self-sustenance. And Mumbai, as you know, is a city which is, of course, the financial capital we know. It's the film industry capital. It's where India's first atomic bomb was built. It's the headquarters of the Indian Navy. It's the pharma capital. I just did a building for Huntsman Laboratories in Mumbai. They're shifting their R&D headquarters from Switzerland to Mumbai. Then we have, so many other shipping, oil field services. A lot of my tenants are oil field services people. So where is the discussion is, what are the problems? We're not talking about the successes and the good things, but where are the problems? Investing in the public realm, creating affordable housing, basic infrastructure, and investment in public transit. But having said that, please note that in Mumbai, 70% of the population uses public transport, and 8 million people every day use public transport. So it's not that we don't have public transport. The city is great because of public transport. What it lacks is that it's on an arterial grid. So, the morning and the evening, getting into the public transport, reaching there at those nodes is the critical thing. It needs to be spread out in a grid so that public transport is, walkable. And being a congested city, BRT is not an option. You have to be looking at high-speed rail, metro rail systems. We have fantastic waterfronts, and obviously the properties along the water are always at a premium. I guess that's everywhere in the world. And this is one of the communities we built starting in 91, where it's mixed use, residential and commercial. This was the land when we took the land. Okay, it was a full quarried land. Unfortunately, I didn't keep so many photos those days. But this is what the land was. Not a single tree. It was all quarry land, barren land, nothing out there. There were bootleggers out there. And quite dangerous to be there alone. So this is what we built on it, a whole community. And just in this project, I have about 6,000 residences, but we also have 165 multinationals here, including Colgate headquarters, Bayer of Germany headquarters, Standard & Poor headquarters, and back offices of JP Morgan and dozens of others. Shipping, pharma, oil field services. And this was never to be, as per the original plan, a commercial center. And today we did manage to create a commercial center. So this is the whole, master plan which really evolved. It's not genius. It's a lot of mistakes you make, you learn along the way. If you go back to what I did in 91, I think I could have done better. So many things. But the important thing is to keep improving and making it good. But what I want to bring about is that the success of the place is that we created public spaces within the project, which we created a fund from all the residents and from the leases. We have a fund which actually we are supposed to hand over these public spaces to the city, but we have taken it over and we maintain it with recycled water through our own landscaping team. And the most important thing is the biggest success of the project is the high street. Without that, I don't think the complex would have had, the project would have had a soul. The soul of the project, crazily, is not the lakefront. We tried to do something on the lakefront, and those activists thought that we want to build something, and they said, get the private developers out. So the government did a nice walkway around it, but it's lonely and it's hardly used. It's only good for looking at while you're driving past. But a high street is what is, really contributed. So we have a whole street of, restaurants primarily. It's a suburban, technically a suburban location. So it's, what has really made it successful are the restaurants. So on this street, we get as good rentals as the most active parts of the city. Rentals, because the occupancy and the crowd there is the same. So we got, since we got mixed use, you got the, it's busy in the day and it's busy at the night with the residences. We have a charitable trust which runs the hospital. My dad's doctor, so it's named after him. This is the first school building. Then we have made another school building. We run 3 schools presently in the country. Surprisingly, my youngest daughter goes to a school where now the principal is a Russian man and is full of expat teachers. In one of our schools, we just recruited a principal from New Zealand. We got teachers from Germany, Australia, England, New Zealand. So this is just, see, the high street is what I feel is my, real success of the project. We have so many other streets, but this, we just call it Central Avenue. So gardens and open green spaces define and connect different sectors, grading. This is one of my friends did it for me. So that also started master planning. Yeah. Okay. So within the landscaping, we love the public art. India is full of sculptures, very cheap to get things done by hand. Oh, getting over. Sorry. So let's go on. Just the public art is very important. That's the emphasis. So if you're doing waterfront development, public art that's a real rainbow. And just see, this all we done this. We got these French guys living in Pondicherry, so they give these sculptures, guys, inputs on, Indo-Western art. And so looking at the city, we are practically somewhere here. And the city which everybody talks about was here. So we are in this deep location where we managed to attract so many offices. By the way, we are one of 4 cities in the world which has a national park in the city, like Hong Kong, Rio, Mumbai, and Nairobi. Every year, about 15 to 20 people get killed by the leopards. And this lake over here, which we overlook, has crocodiles. Just 2 years back, one of my elevator mechanics went fishing there in the morning and got killed. So this is a waterfront development in Chennai, which we did. Now, what do we do with the waterfront? This is not downtown as such. So we decided that sports facilities are the best. various reasons. There's a water crunch there. Chennai is short of water. And this grass is coincidentally not imported from China, but from the United States of America, the seedlings. It's seawater grass. And we get crazy people from the building who say that we're going to complain to the authorities because they notice the water levels going down at times, thinking that we're drawing so much water for the grass that we're disturbing the creek which runs along our property. But it's obviously the tides which go up and down. So you can see the tennis courts. We have basketball courts. So we have lined up 6 tennis courts, 4 basketball courts, football ground, cricket, of course, in India. Cricket is number 1. Coming to the waterfront, there are a number of architects who have put up proposals on how the waterfront could be. I'm not saying this is the way it should be done, but this is what I could get hold of. But it's really a landscaping exercise, and you do anything on the waterfront, it's going to be attractive to people. Coming to I think the last point is that there's a huge scope in the city to reclaim land and get revenue. And I mean, it's very easy. This particular spot, I've just marked it theoretically. I'm not saying this is what needs to be reclaimed, but this could easily generate, about $1.5 to $2 billion of positive revenue for the city. But what the city needs to do is to make non-automobile oriented development. We have crazy laws which make, when we discuss with the politicians, they say, no, that's what the people want. And they made the development rules such that we have to provide huge amounts of car parking for our buildings, which is equal to amount of built-up space in which people live in, which is equivalent to $1 a gallon gasoline buildings in the Middle East. That kind of architecture, and what is equivalent to what is in suburban America. So I attended this seminar on some Urban Traffic Institute, and they were giving out figures that, India is on par with the US. I said, which part of the US? New York City doesn't have it. So, they were comparing suburban USA and saying that, the government of India has put rules for Mumbai city, which is on par with suburban Mumbai. And that's a mindset which is a big challenge, and this is what really, I would love that Studio X and everybody else here gets involved and explains the common man, explains the politician, that the future of the city is without private automobiles. Please work on that. Reclaim as much land as you want, get the revenue, but invest it in public transport, invest in walkable communities. Of course, make roads. We need the ambulance, we need the trucks, we need the buses. Of course, you need the roads, but you also need the high-speed trains. And we have the youngest population in the world, below 35 years. The future is fantastic if everything is harnessed well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Paul, any crocodiles in Queens?
No, I was thinking, I thought we had every obstacle there, but no deaths by wild animals. Anyway, I'm Paul Januszewski. I am working for Rock Rose now, which is a private developer, but I have a background with the city and the state. And I was actually just thinking here for the first time I've worked for the city, the state, the Port Authority, and Rock Rose. So those are all of the parties who have been involved here. So I have a few different hats, but most of what I'm talking about now is from my Queens West experience. So this is just a picture to show the site. It's already pretty outdated, but I like it because it shows how close it is to Midtown. It's only one stop away from Grand Central on the 7 train. It's 74 acres of land altogether that used to be manufacturing. This is some of the historic conditions, as I think Mark and Kate were saying in the beginning, that this was a port before it was a city, and most of the transportation of goods and raw materials happened along the waterfront. And so the waterfront became where all of the undesirable uses were pushed. power plants, oil refineries, slaughterhouses, all these kind of port activities, and the people tended to stay in the middle and ignore the waterfront. So that has an impact later on, both in trying to redevelop this land, also because the city subway system wasn't designed to reach a lot of these waterfront areas, and that later hindered a lot of the redevelopment of the space. So this is the type of uses that were there. These gantry cranes on the top are actually still there and have been incorporated into the design of the park there now. Rail lines ran right to the waterfront, and then these cranes were used to transfer materials from rail to barge for transport between Manhattan and Long Island and other areas. This site was also specifically home of a Pepsi bottling plant eventually, an oil refinery, a lot of coal tar production, so some what turned out to be some messy uses. As I said, this turned into a partnership between the state of New York, the city of New York, and the Port Authority, which is a bi-state agency here, New Jersey and New York. It's also a public-private partnership, so a lot of the financing came from private developers as well. It was 74 acres. It was initially planned to be built out in 4 stages. The stages 3 and 4, which were the bottom half, eventually got turned over to the city and is now part of a separate project called Hunter's Point South. But the 2 northern sections have been filled out and are now completed. So regarding the envisioning, the planning effort, I just listed some of the milestones here. A lot of what I hear now from people is, I was driving up the FDR and all these buildings popping up over near the Pepsi sign. I can't believe how quickly it's happening. But actually, as a lot of us know, the planning takes a lot longer than the construction of the buildings. So going all the way back to 1982 was when the site was first identified by city planning, the city, as a site for reuse, a waterfront development site that was prioritized for reuse. There were a lot of jurisdiction issues here. Some of the land was owned by the city, some by the state, some by private entities. So eventually a decision was made to form a new subsidiary of the state that would be run by the city, the state, and the Port Authority. That was called Queens West Development Corporation. Planning efforts went on in the mid-'80s. This involved a lot of community input, figuring out what uses should be there, defining what the development parcels would be, what would be parkland. All of the infrastructure needed to be built, the streets, the utilities, sewers, all of that needed to be built. And then there was a long environmental review process, especially since this was a heavily contaminated site. But all the planning involved with how many people are going to live here, how many schools are needed, what transportation is needed. That went on, and findings were ultimately concluded in 1991 for the environmental review. The first buildings in phase 1, the first building was completed in 97. The first section of park opened in 98. After that, there was a bit of a lull in development, partially because of economic conditions, but also during that time, the city became focused on trying to get the 2012 Olympics. That started in the early 2000s, and this second half of this project was seen as it was about 30 acres of vacant land right across from Midtown, so this was intended to be the Olympic Village, and plans were put on hold for quite a few years here. When that didn't come through, the city started to rethink the use of this, and ultimately there was what I call a friendly divorce, where the city and the state separated. The city got the south, the state got the north. That's now Hunters Point South. There's 5,000 units of housing being developed down there, affordable housing, and the state finished out construction of the north. Oh, and I also wanted to mention the last of the residential buildings on the north just opened 2 weeks ago. So all of the buildings are open. There's 12 acres of park that's been completed. There's two public schools and all of the infrastructure. Just some quick parts of the financial deal. The land in this phase 2 of the project was actually purchased by Rockrose, the developer, from Pepsi, who is the landowner, at their cost, but it was turned over at no cost to the state. And Queens West became the owner. That was done in part to benefit from incentives the state could offer by being the owner of the land. 50% of the cost of all the public infrastructure that was needed, the utilities, the park, was paid by Rockrose, the developer. The remainder was paid by the Port Authority. The developers were also responsible for the environmental remediation, which was a major component of this project, and it was really what was held up development here for a long time. Ultimately, that turned into about a $85 million project remediating this site. There was 80,000 cubic tons of soil removed from the site, clean soil brought in, removal of tanks and piping and oil spills. There was a lot to deal with there, but it's now one of the cleanest places you can live in New York. Queens West eventually executed 7 separate leases for the northern phase with Rockrose. There was an RFP that was done for a developer altogether, all of these sites, and Rockrose was awarded all 7 sites. With those leases, there was also a general project plan developed for this area, which we call a GPP, which is a state has the power to develop these GPPs. They can be used for a lot of different reasons, but in this case, a lot of it was to override the existing zoning, which was all manufacturing. GPP lays out what can be developed on each site, and developers then follow that. They don't follow city zoning. And just quickly, other parts of the financial structure, there is no property tax there because it's city-owned. There's a pilot payment in lieu of taxes. The money does go to the city Department of Finance, but for about 20 years, it's very low. Eventually, it gets ramped up after 25 years to full property taxes, but at that time, the developers can purchase the buildings for a nominal amount. There's other incentives like they don't pay mortgage recording tax, sales tax on construction materials, other benefits. Developers also pay for the maintenance of the park. There's a fee that is based on the square footage of residential space that pays to fully fund the operations of the park. That's the basis of it. This is just some photos of the park that's been completed. This is a condo building, which is now I think it is the highest, most expensive condos in Queens. They face the skyline, this park in front of them. So there's some of the parks, playgrounds. Again, there's 12 acres of waterfront park. Altogether, there's about 5,000 units of housing. Most of it is rental buildings, but some of it is condo and co-ops. The second phase had about 3 million square feet of floor area, residential floor area. The whole 2 phases are close to 5 million square feet. It's a lot of housing, and I think that's it.
So I also prefer to stand. Hi, I'm Greg Vaca. I'm Director of Acquisitions for Tishman Speyer in Rio de Janeiro. So I thought it'd be helpful to give you all a background on the real estate industry in Brazil because it functions in a very different way than it does here in New York and in other places around the world. But it's basically a market, Rio de Janeiro, it's defined by its limitations, right? When you look at this, I mean, this is the landscape of the city. This is what everybody comes to Rio for. I mean, it's gorgeous. You have wonderful urban beaches. It's been called Manhattan on the beach. You also have, as was said on this panel, you have a national forest that has the Christ the Redeemer statue and the Sugarloaf Mountain with the cable car and all these great amenities. But when you think about it from a real estate perspective, these are enormous restrictions, right? So you have a city that, and it's become very cliche to say this, but it's a city where, you know, the water meets the mountains. So where do people live? They can't live on the water. A lot of people have gone up the mountains in informal residential called favelas, right, the slums. But where do you actually develop property, right? This has been a historical problem that over time has pushed people farther and farther away from the city center. only what was produced far from the city center was extremely suburban in nature and not very attractive, especially to the new generation that doesn't want to get in a car and drive 2 hours into the city center. So this is the principal restriction on development in Rio de Janeiro, is geographical. Now you go from that beautiful image to lovely downtown Rio de Janeiro. This is very typical of Rio de Janeiro office space. So you look at these buildings and you think, okay, you have all this beauty, this natural beauty, and then this is what, 65% of the stock is in downtown. Half of the stock, about 45% of the stock of all office space doesn't have central air. In New York, that would be a problem. In Rio de Janeiro, where in the winter it's 85 degrees and sunny, that's just a major problem, and not just for air conditioning costs, but also for, you think about sustainability, energy use, blackouts, etc. It's a major problem. So, why is it that if you have all these high barriers to entry, which in Manhattan create fantastic skyscrapers, very high-end property, why has that not happened in Brazil? So the reason is financing. You look at these buildings here; these are all fractionally owned. Right? What does that mean? That means, okay, you had land, no commercial financing is available. You wanted to build an office building, but you don't have the money to do it. So what do? You put up a little sales office, you launch the project to the general public, and you try to sell 50, 70% of the units. Some of the units are as small as 250 square feet, in order to take those proceeds and to build the building, to finance the building. So that sounds good, so for somebody who wants to hedge against inflation, real estate's always a great option, so they sell very well. But then what happens 40 years later, right? What happens when you have 200 owners in one building and it's time to do some critical maintenance on the facade or the elevating or anything? Here, and because of the way the Brazilian legal system works, you can't even find a lot of these owners because the property's passed down, through generations, and the ancestors live in Europe or somewhere else, and so what happens? No one's going to put money into the building unless everyone does. So some of these buildings fall into disrepair and literally fall over, which is something that you've had happen in the center of Brazil, in the center of Rio. Buildings literally collapse on themselves because people are making structural changes to the building without checking what the guy upstairs is doing, right? So then he brings in some concrete to fix up his space, and the building collapses. So this is a major problem. It's also a major opportunity because you have a lot of these buildings have Class A tenants in Class C space, right? So you get to the next restriction, which is landmarking. That's actually a good restriction. You want to preserve all this beautiful space, but the zoning has caused these canyon walls of office space, and behind them you have all these beautiful buildings that, most of them are in disrepair. You don't have the financing to refurbish these properties, so you wind up having really a dead zone. I mean, this area in specific has some great retail during the day, but you wind up having a downtown where nobody lives. So, we're so used to thinking you want to be close to the infrastructure. In New York, how far away you are from the subway determines how much your real estate's worth, and in most cities. But here, where the metro goes to downtown, nobody lives. Until recently, a lot of these areas, it was illegal to do by zoning residential. So can you imagine the consequences of this? You have 65% of the office space in an area where nobody lives, right? But this is all cliche. You talk about Rio, there's no space, but is there? It turns out that there is space. So this image, it seems, has not adapted well to the projecting, but if you imagine the traditional downtown is in this yellow space, right, with the major arteries of Rio Branco and Presidente Vargas, where all this office space exists, and as well as all these landmark buildings. So, in a city with no space, it's kind of interesting that it took decades to realize there's 5 million square meters of space just on the other side of the principal commercial avenue in Rio. So, what about all the decades of, there's no space, so you got to build buildings one up next? No, look at all this. You go to the north, to the whole port zone, you have an area the size of the whole downtown that's abandoned old warehouses. that's close to infrastructure, that's on the waterfront, right? You heard a little talk about the perimeter highway. The perimeter highway restricted people's access from the waterfront. Only now that the perimeter highway is being demolished, you actually see that this is a waterfront city. And people are starting to wake up to this realization. So it turns out that all along there was 5 million square meters of space. So what was the plan? The plan was, hey, let's take all this space that was all infill, as you saw in some of the images earlier, and let's zone it for modern office buildings. So not office buildings that are, as you saw on that avenue, one right next to the other. The back view is usually to another building, which in New York you're all very familiar with. You live in an apartment building where you can see your neighbor outside of your window. But you think about modern office space, you only have one viewed facade, right? So natural light doesn't really exist. The windows you do have are filled with air conditioners. So where are you going to build this, new property, new modern high-rise property? It's this zone. This is naturally going to be the continuation of downtown, but also more than that, it's going to be the downtown. This is not just, an improvement on what went wrong. This is, the new center of Rio. So this is a project we're doing with Foster and Partners, as you see, and if we had more time, we could go into more detail, but here we took what was zoned as a dead-end street and turned it into what will be a beautiful plaza, where those sorts of negotiations were impossible to have on property in other parts of downtown. But because you have a special port authority that manages this development, you were able to say, hey, let's scrap the dead-end street. Let's put in a beautiful plaza. There's light rail infrastructure. This case is the largest waterfront property in the port zone. I'll just go quickly here. How is this all possible? I'm not going to steal, the presentation from some people we'll talk later, but it's all financed through the sale of FAR, of property rights. So this is an urban operation, which means, specifically all of the FAR sale has to go into infrastructure within this same zone. This, it seems so logical now. This is something that started, at least in Brazil, it started in Sao Paulo, and now is being exported everywhere. But this mechanism is how you assure that this all gets built. So the infrastructure is guaranteed by the sale of additional potential, right? This image was actually already used at this conference. But so what is it? Where does the money go? It goes into what will be the premier underground infrastructure in Rio. So no more overhead wires. Everything underground. So no more flooding, et cetera. Fiber optics, which don't even exist elsewhere. There's an elaborate light rail network that links up all of the nodes. So you have the ferry, which now ferries 600,000 people a day to the sister city of Niterói, the regional rail, various metro stations, the most important bus station in the city. All of this will now be hooked up into this light rail system, which goes directly into the core of downtown as well. And I'll leave you with this image. This may not say too much to you, but this is the most important image for the future of Rio. It's how you link up the extension of the metro line with the BRT lines and what creates what we call a new centrality. And the new centrality is that the downtown is moving to the port zone, and it is the place that's going to have the easiest access to where the development has gone over the last 50 years, which is out into the west zone, which today does not have any mass transit. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you all. One of the places I wanted to start is your private responsibilities as developers versus the responsibilities of the public. And you went through some of that, Paul, in terms of financing that you talked about. But we've had examples here in New York, for instance, of the government owning a piece of land where the government says, okay, we're going to build the infrastructure and then we're going to parcel out the developments to different developers and try to maximize value. A lot of risk entailed for the government to do that. We've had the opposite scenario where we've handed it all over to a developer or a group of developers and had them build the infrastructure and had them build it piece by piece. And there are a lot of questions about whether you get consistency, whether you get reliability, whether you get the right kind of public access. I'm just wondering, as you're looking at your various waterfront parcels, how you're engaged with the government on those issues.
Well, in our project, we are doing all the infrastructure. So the government is not providing any infrastructure, but I think our main responsibility, especially in our project, comes from building a project that fits into the city, that is representing Istanbul, that's representing the historic city, and that's really adding to the city life.
Well, isn't that the question when you're building all the infrastructure? Are there questions about whether there is a feeling that somehow when you've crossed into your development, that you've left what feels like the rest of the city of Istanbul and have crossed into a new and different place as a consequence of the fact that you're building the infrastructure?
That's a very good point. We are trying to be very careful by designing our project on the waterfront to be understated so that it fits into the rest of the city. We don't want to build something that feels like Mumbai, or that feels like Singapore, or that feels like Dubai or New York. It has to feel Istanbul. And so all the infrastructure, all the design, all of it is fitting into Istanbul. So when you take those buildings out, people should say, this is Istanbul and it should be in Istanbul.
Okay. You have thoughts on this?
India is very large, so we need a mix of both. But typically, government will step in and do the infrastructure when they own the land. If the government owns the land, they're definitely going to do the infrastructure themselves. They're not going to give it to anybody in India. But if they're going to acquire private land, that is a big cost of money. And if they're going to acquire even from individual farmers, the government can do it better than the private developer in terms of issuing notices and finding who are the owners and where are the relatives and everybody. But at the same time, they need a lot of cash to hand out to the farmers and traditional landowners or even the urban areas. So you have to get the private sector in when there will be private lands. So, and then, there's no money for infrastructure.
Well, and you also, though, you made a very specific comment about the waterfront kind of promenade that the government built versus your high street. And that the high street was actually quite successful, had a lot of retail and activity.
Exactly, you do.
Is that because you felt that...
No, but like the government has created hawker zones on the beaches, and they're very important for the beach. I mean, people, if there no hawker zone there, it would die, people would, it would be a rampant illegal activity going on. So, when they reclaim land, it's going to be government land, isn't it? Okay, if they reclaim land, the government is going to do the infrastructure. Hopefully, they do it, as I said, transit-oriented development, non-automobile based, zero car parking, zero private automobile car parking, and there you go, and then you auction the land.
Right. We, of course, can't reclaim. We can't reclaim land here, which is something that we should probably investigate.
But you have
further.
traditionally.
We have traditionally, straight into the 1980s. Yes, we have.
Yeah. So we are still young country. We're still early stages.
Greg, what are your? I mean, you just described an enormous amount of infrastructure.
Right. So it's a very novel way that it was done in Rio, and it's this concept of an urban operation, which was very successful. But usually how this is done is you auction off FAR, and the proceeds from that auction go to invest incrementally in infrastructure. In this case, we didn't have the luxury of time. That takes decades for the FAR to get value to the point where it can pay for the infrastructure. In this case, you need everything done by 2016. In Rio, 2016 is a magical number. Everything happens in 2016. I don't think anything happens before 2016. Who knows what's going to happen after? But that's the year of the Olympics, right? So everything had to be done. The entire infrastructure project had to be done for 2016. So how do you do that? Enter our partners at the Federal Bank, who, with what they call the Fundo de Garantia, which is like Social Security, they invested in they will pay for all of the infrastructure, about 8 billion reais, so $3.5 billion in infrastructure. And all of that FAR that was caused by downzoning, so they downzone everything to one-time FAR, and then they upzoned when you buy these FAR titles up to as high as 12 times. All of that money goes into the infrastructure. Right, so the infrastructure had to be done over a very short timeline. So it gives developers, a lot of security when you can walk around the port zone and you see that everything is already happening, the tunnels are already fully dug,
Which the government is building.
No, so the 8 billion reais went to pay for what's called a public-private partnership. So basically they hired a consortium of Rio and Brazil's 3 biggest construction companies that will not only execute all of the infrastructure, so the tunnels, all the new roads, all the underground piping and cabling, all of that, but they then will have a 10-year contract to maintain it. So I think what they've done very intelligently, it wouldn't work in New York maybe, but they've removed government from the equation. Right, so who's going to be, collecting the garbage? In this case, it's probably going to be the same company. But changing the light bulbs, maintenance, everything is going to be this construction
Does that change
consortium.
how the public infrastructure can be used? In other words, is that space policed differently? Is it?
It is. It is. It's actually this. There are going to be cameras in the security project of the port zone is extremely elaborate in terms of security, in terms of monitoring, which that's a whole nother question. And it gets into, okay, is the port zone going to be the basis for redeveloping the old downtown for the rest of the city, perhaps? Because the infrastructure we're talking about in terms of security cameras, fiber optic, it doesn't exist in the city anywhere. So the idea is to use this as a template and then bring it into the rest of the city. Now, will it feel a little different than downtown? For sure. It will feel like a much nicer, cleaner environment than you currently have in downtown. But the idea is then to have a second revitalization of the existing downtown.
Okay.
Queens West, it was a real public-private partnership. The financial responsibilities were very intertwined. Part of that was because you had a lot of big upfront expenses. You had to build all the utilities before you could do anything. You had to do this huge cleanup before you could do anything. So it wasn't something a private developer would be able to undertake. And even though now it seems like building a tower on the waterfront in Queens is a home run, even 10 years ago it wasn't. It was very risky, and to make such big investments there was hard. So the state and the city were needed. I think it was broken up pretty well. I'm sure things would have been done differently if we could start over, but in general, there was financial commitments from all the different parties, and I think they're all benefiting now. There's a great park there that's funded by the development. There's the redevelopment has really spread beyond this site to all of Long Island City now, which is a real booming real estate market, and so it was a shared.
Paul, I wonder what you think about, on the question of use, something that I was very struck by in all 3 of your presentations is that you talked about a mixed-use waterfront in various ways. And yet, the de Blasio administration, our new mayor, and Alicia Glenn, the deputy mayor, has been kind of critical of some of the development that we've seen on the Brooklyn and Queens waterfront, that it's basically a big residential tower with kind of a grocery store, or maybe a drugstore on the bottom, and somehow that's mixed use. Whereas in all of these other environments, we seem to see people places where people can both work and live, as well as cultural facilities, hotels, and so forth. Did we somehow go wrong as a city in terms of how mono-use this waterfront's become compared to these international cities?
Well, definitely now I think planning has evolved, and that is what's desired, is very truly mixed-use communities where people are living and working together. At this time, there were commercial components planned here, and the market just couldn't support them at the time. One of the whole sections that's residential now was meant to be commercial towers. Some of that was the market. Some of that were these transportation issues where people are willing to walk further to the subway, to their home, than they are to their office, and we just really couldn't attract big office buildings over here. So I think if we were planning it over, we'd plan it differently, but this is part of what could happen where we could get private investment to make the project happen. And I think gradually it is evolving into more of an integrated community, and other commercial buildings are starting to come over there, and hopefully it will evolve into more of a mixed-use area.
So just before I open it up to questions, I had one last question, which is there wasn't a lot of mention in your presentations about sea level rise. And I'm just wondering how you're all thinking about this, given that you're developing right on the water and that there's a lot of risk associated with this and so forth.
Yeah, I've been excited about it because it's interesting.
You're
to hear
excited about
figures.
sea level rise?
Excited in the sense that of the subject, as a subject. So in this project in Chennai, which is on the creek, of course, we have the whole Indian Ocean just at the end of the creek. We raised everything by 3 meters. We kept the car parking and the clubhouse at the lower level. So the whole development, the lobby level is 3 meters higher. But now they say now they're talking about 10-meter high
But don't you worry
rise
about
in
how
global
that,
levels.
Don't you worry about how that impacts the street?
No, this was on the water side. The streets are
Or
yeah.
on the waterfront then?
Yeah,
Don't you
we
worry
sort of
about what it feels like?
We sloped the roads to the waterfront. We sloped them down. So you enter the buildings here. It's a large development. And we sloped it down 3 meters down to the road, the waterfront road. So we enter from the buildings from here. And below is the car park and the clubhouse, which opens into the open space of the... But... whatever I can understand is that everybody's designing for storm surges. Nobody's designing for Antarctica melting or Greenland melting. Everybody's just designing for storm surges.
Sardar, have you had to put a lot of thought into that in terms of your project?
No, because and unfortunately Istanbul is not prepared for that. If something like that happens in Istanbul, we're in big trouble. I mean, it's the way the city is structured. We cannot raise our project because we have buildings right behind it. Actually, Studio X is right behind it, so they will be the first to protest. And so that's the way the city is structured. So we have the channel of city water passing through the city. So if the water rises, the city is in trouble.
Is there talk of sea gates on the Bosphorus?
No.
Gotta ask a fun question. Come on, Kate. Right?
The Porto Maravilha project in Rio de Janeiro was, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was structured to consider certain rise in sea level. So, and as it is, it's all infill, right? So
Right.
it sort of goes to the challenge of building there. I mean, this is all dirt, and the water is just, a meter below you. Right, so that's its own building challenge since you need to anchor into the bedrock, which is similar. It's a granite rock, but you have to go 15 meters down when water is just 1 meter down. So water is, your best asset in terms of value, but it's also, from starting in the construction phase, it's a huge problem, right? Getting the water, keeping it dewatered, building the slurry walls, etc. But it's actually higher than the sea level on the bay, the port zone. So there is that was actually considered in the project.
Queens West, was planned so long ago. I can't say they took climate change into consideration, but actually there were issues there that forced the developers to address a lot of it. There was a very high water table, so none of the buildings have basements there. A lot of the utilities that would normally be in basements are raised above. So there was the park does have berms around some of the buildings which prevented water rising. So it fared pretty well. Our other buildings, Rock Rose buildings, we have buildings in Battery Park City, downtown. Generally, we were pretty lucky, even in Battery Park City. I mean, the odd thing is a lot of the newer buildings that were built on the waterfront received less damage than some of the older communities because some of these things were planned for. Our Battery Park City buildings didn't even lose power. They didn't have any water, even though they're right on the water. So, but it has caused us to look at all of our buildings and see what we can do and should we diversify. And it's definitely a consideration now.
Okay. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Yes, ma'am?
Thank you. My question is to Mr. Bilgili because I'm part of the Istanbul team. 2 questions. One, a smaller one, which interests me very much. You mentioned that, you used the word the warehouses are ugly and they will be demolished. As you probably know, they are actually by Turkey's most famous modern architect, Sedat Eldem, and at least on the street front, there is a facade that is rather important. So my question is, were there any studies of retrofitting or repurposing or before that decision was taken? So that's the little question. And the larger one is, you talked about creating public space. Of course, this is now the keyword everywhere. But what is public space and which public we're talking about is a huge, huge issue. And the way I will formulate the question is, you talk about public space and you mentioned it will be retail, offices, residences, and luxury hotel. And the image that comes to mind, and looking at the perspectives as well, what kind of measures were built into this to make this affordable to certainly the local communities, small businesses, etc.? Because otherwise, if it's another Zorlu Center or Canyon, which may make more sense in Maslak or Levent, which is the new CBD, but this place, as you said, is the heart of historic city. So you did talk about the importance of the historic city, but frankly, it's hard to see it looking at the perspectives or the programmatic, the program that you outlined. So I'm just curious if there were any attempts to bring in small businesses, local communities, or is this just going to be a very high-end complex?
Thank you so much. First of all, yes, I definitely know that these warehouses are built and designed by one of the most important architects of Turkish history, Sedat Hakkı Eldem. But unfortunately, when you look at the photograph, I don't think they really reflect the best work of Sedat Hakkı Eldem. I'm not in the position to discuss that here, but this was a decision. As you know, this property is auctioned by the government. We were the highest bidders with Doğuş Holding, who's one of the largest conglomerates in Turkey, and actually it's a 30-year long lease or a concession of use of these properties. So in this, it includes the demolition of all those buildings, because when you look at those buildings, it's not really the best use of the space either. So coming to your second question, this property is about 120,000 square meter land. And right now, that 1.2 kilometer of waterfront is completely closed to public use. So first of all, we are opening 1.2 kilometer of waterfront for complete public use. Secondly, we are putting 2 separate parks, which are totaling about 35,000 square meters, which will be used as a public space and designed as a public space. Now, coming to the commercial side of this, of course, when I talk to people in Istanbul, they all ask, oh, are you going to make public spaces, galleries, places for public? But you should know that we have paid $720 million. We are investing another $450 million. So the total is $1.2 billion. And I have to make that money back in 30 years. So, and these kind of developments, I have to look at the commercial side. So is it going to be only Louis Vuittons, Gucci's, Prada's? No, definitely not. It will be, because we have about 65,000 square meter of retail space. So it will be a very wide range of retail, and it will be the new high street shopping of Istanbul. So in high street shopping, it's not going to be only high-end stores like in Zorlu, but we will have a very wide variety of retail, restaurants, bars, and public spaces. So it's going to be open to public, but for the business purpose and for commercial purposes, we will try to maximize our income so that we get paid on our investment for sure.
Okay. Should we cut it off or one last cut? All right, quick question over on the left, please.
My question's for Mr. Hiranandani. You started by saying that if you could, you would change something about the project given today. Would one of those changes have been the high street and the public spaces which are completely enclosed by the towers and not oriented towards the waterfront? And were there financial reasons or rules and regulations which restricted it? Because I know you couldn't build on the waterfront given the activists in the government, but those spaces could have been oriented towards it. So what was
No, all the public spaces are open to the public. Some of them where we have water bodies and we put water boats with koi carp in them, we charge 5 rupees, which is like 1 cent or something.
Yeah, but I think he's
for
asking about
entry.
whether the buildings are oriented towards the high street or towards the water.
Yeah, because
No,
all
no,
the
no.
buildings.
It's a lake. There's a major highway running around the lake, which feeds into our project. I don't own land abutting the lake. Very little bit abutting the road, which I'd rather be a little away from that road because it's a highway and it's a noise of cars. You want to be away from that highway and yet look at the lake. That's the most prime.
Yeah, no, I was asking, would the high street and the public spaces
The
be
public
more-
spaces are within which we have created abut the roads within the project, which are public roads. They are not private roads. It's not a gated community. We have public transit buses running through the project. Even on so-called private
I think your
roads.
question points to this kind of tricky issue, which is retail likes to face each other, and waterfront retail is always difficult because of that thing
Challenge.
that challenge of just facing retail out to the water.
I would say, why not like Alexandria, just a perpendicular waterfront high street, and then you enjoy a little bit of the water also. And
Let's use New York examples. No, Alexander. Thank you very much to this terrific panel. Thank you.